Hi folks, North here. Another video on the Live or Die Off the Land series. It's been a while since I've done one. I need to start getting caught up. Um, this one is going to be titled Surviving the Winter. Um, Now, this whole series was based on some viewers' questions about surviving off the land in a primitive or near primitive state, uh, not homesteading, not that type of surviving off the land, not emergency survival, but long-term living off of the raw land. With that, I've covered a lot of areas. Let's take a quick look. The types of living off the land, and the things that can go really bad when trying to live off the land or survive off the land. Are you even allowed to live off the land? Are you prepared to live off the land? Things that you can eat. What resources are there to support yourself? Now comes the issue of surviving a winter living off the land. Now, I had mentioned in an earlier video, if a person, a modern day person, wanted to live off the land, raw land, just go out there and live off the land, ideally, that person would put themselves in that situation in the spring of the year. That would give them the full spring season and summer season and fall season to prepare to survive a winter. Now, myself and my family, we did a full winter, totally off-grid, generally living off the land. We did go to town on rare occasions and buy certain staples to get us through. But we ate mainly wild game and things that we had harvested. It was very difficult. It was a very good learning experience. What my biggest concern is even myself being very, very involved in the outdoors and in every season. Never experienced winter in that way before. Winters are very difficult, very difficult. The game is not there. The wild edibles, plant life is not there. To procure fish is difficult. Unless you're on a lake that has a large panfish population where you can go chop a hole in the ice and ice fish and catch a lot of panfish. You're not going to be doing that on a creek or on a small river or a lake that doesn't have a large fish population. Procuring fish, even in the winter, even though they may be plentiful, is very difficult. It burns a lot of calories. There's a lot of risks that go with it. Risks of falling through the ice, risks of frostbite. Now, I'll tell you about frostbite here in a minute, but there's certain hazards that go with procuring fish during the winter. ideally, as I said, you would have spring, summer, and fall to hunt and gather or trap, whatever method to procure your food, and preserve that food to carry you through the winter. Now, historically, most native populations in North America would spend all three of those seasons preparing for the next winter. Winters were very difficult on them. That's when most people passed away, was during the winter months, because the foodstuffs weren't there. Their health was hard to maintain. The elements themselves. Now I'm going to talk real quick about that preparation process. Not only do you have to prepare your food to get you through that winter, you have to prepare an adequate shelter. An open front lean-to shelter will not do it. Some people would want to argue with me and say, "Oh yeah, you'll get through." Can you survive it for the winter? Yes. You're going to come out of it in the spring not in good shape. It is going to take a huge toll on you physically. You need a fully enclosed shelter with an interior source of heat. So you're going to want to build a permanent type shelter that has an internal fire pit that can be vented and smoked out of the shelter, or a primitive form of fireplace of some sort, so that you can not just be in a situation where you're going to retain some heat. You have to be able to produce heat inside that shelter. Now, a good example is here in northern Wisconsin, northern Minnesota, northern Michigan. If you were to go out there for a full winter and you try to do it in an open-faced lean-to with nothing but long fires to keep you warm, we have periods sometimes that you can have anywhere from 7 to 14 days of sub-zero weather. That would take such a caloric toll on your body, just trying to maintain your heat, your body heat. And the amount of wood that you use is only about 20% efficient, because it's open air. That heat's going everywhere, and very little of it's actually getting to you. A lot of people say, "Oh, I get a lot of heat off of a campfire in front of my lean-to." Well, it feels like a lot of heat, but think about it. That little front of your lean-to, the amount of heat you're getting there, there's 80% of that fire is totally exposed to the elements. That heat's going somewhere else. It's not all coming to you. Now, you can have a much smaller fire and maintain much more heat if you could have it in an enclosed structure. So you would have to build yourself an enclosed structure that you could have a fire pit or a fireplace inside of. And you also have to have the ability to not spend 24 hours a day wearing multiple layers of clothes. That's not healthy for you, actually. You need to get out of those clothes. Your body needs to breathe, and you need to change those clothes, and there's a hygiene issue that goes with it. There's a lot of considerations there. Because of the fact there's very little to harvest and survive on over the winter, you need to build those stocks. You need to consider how much food will I need to get me through that whole winter. And you need to store that up. We'll get into storing and preservation issues in future videos, but right now we're just talking about winter, the act of surviving the winter. that shelter needs to be warm. You need to have the food stores. The shelter has to be strong. It has to be super strong. Because in our area, we get a lot of snow. You want as much snow as possible to cover that shelter and be around that shelter because it adds insulating factors to your shelter. But you put a lot of that snow load on your shelter and it can come down on you. I've seen many shelters that look super strong, super strong, collapse under a snow load. So you have to take a lot of consideration, put a lot of consideration into how heavy the materials are and how much material you're going to use to build that shelter. It has to be very solid and secure. You lose your shelter and you could lose your life, because that's the hardest part of winter, is making it through the elements. Having food and making it through the elements, key. So during those 3 seasons, you're not just hunting and gathering food, you're also searching out, hunting and gathering firewood. You need firewood, and you need a lot of it. It's amazing how much wood it takes to get through a winter. Now, I'm not talking about heating a house, I'm talking about heating a small shelter. Still, it is very difficult to collect that much wood. Many Native Americans would build what they would call a wood fence around their dwelling, whether it be a wigwam, a longhouse, a teepee. They build a fence all the way around their dwelling out of branches, sticks, twigs, large pieces of wood, and they'd stack that and they'd make it thick, probably 8 feet wide and 6 to 8 feet tall, all the way around their shelter. And they would work off of that all winter, and by spring there'd be no wood left stacked all the way around their shelters. So there's a lot to consider when it comes to winter. There's a lot of hazards. And what I was going to say, when I mentioned frostbite earlier, I met a fellow last week, young fella, I think he's 26 years old is what he said. And I noticed his hands and his fingers. Some of them were black, some of them were every color under the rainbow. And I asked him, what happened to your fingers? He couldn't bend them. And he said he went out ice fishing and wasn't paying attention, and in a matter of 20 minutes he had frozen his hands. Well, it was 25 below wind chills that day, and he was out on a big open bay here on Lake Superior. Now, I just saw him 2 days ago, and he had bad news, and he was showing me his hands. Gangrene had set in, and I believe it's today. They're removing 5 of his fingers. These 3 on his right hand. So he'll only have his pointing finger and his thumb on his right hand. They're taking those 3. On his left hand, they're taking the little finger and the ring finger. So he'll only have these 3. So this is what he's going to have after 20 minutes of not paying attention to the fact that his hands were freezing. And what happened is he's fishing and he's catching fish and his hands are getting wet. He's in a non-heated little teepee, fishing teepee, non-heated, and his hands are getting soaking wet constantly, and he's just wiping them off on his pants, he said, and he just rub them together once in a while. And he said they started to hurt, but then they started to just get kind of numb. And he said within 20 minutes, it got where he could hardly bend them. So he put them in his pockets to warm them up, and they hurt so bad that he had to have a friend of his. He managed to use his cell phone, call a friend, come out and help him take his little teepee down and get his gear together and come back to shore. In 20 minutes, That man caused the damage that's going to leave him with 5 fingers. That's all he's going to have now, the rest of his life. Because of 20 minutes exposure to that sub-zero weather. Now, I suppose I'll get somebody saying, oh, well, that's not possible. It takes this long or that long. Well, you tell this young man that. Don't tell me. I don't know if I can get his contact information or not. I wouldn't want to take pictures of what I saw, let alone what it's going to look like when he loses his fingers. The fact of the matter is he got frostbite, gangrene, and is now losing all but 5 fingers. Now, if that happened to you and you're trying to live off the land, it's going to be really difficult when you're down to 5 fingers to do all the things you need to do to see that you survive off the land. That could be the difference between life and death. Now, out in the wilderness, that happens to you, and you're living off the land and totally off grid, and you're not using any of society's benefits. That gangrene would have traveled, and that would have been the end of his adventures. It would have killed him. So, just a little something on surviving in the outdoors, living off the land in the winter. Living off the land in the winter means having enough food stores put up, enough firewood to keep you warm throughout the winter, the least amount of activity as possible to save your inner core reserves. You want to keep some fat on your body, you want your inner core to always stay warm, and you wait out the winters. That would be the only way that I would recommend anybody try to survive a winter. Try to survive it the way the primitives used to. And that's stay put. You only go out there if you absolutely have to. And you shouldn't have to if you got enough food stores put up and enough firewood put up. So, there you go. Surviving a winter, living off the land, and preferably not dying off the land. So there we are. This is Stein North. Thanks for watching. Just another video on this series, and I'll try to get another one out soon. So, in the meantime, if you're out there winter camping, do it safe. Do it often. We'll see you. You all have a nice day. Bye-bye.